ready for opening day, which would be a horrible setback for a guy who did work really hard this winter, who came to camp in shape, who came to camp playing well in the winter leagues, cut his heel during a celebration, and still isn't on the field. I always remember talking to Kadire about this stuff. He said, "Hey, I just need 2 weeks of seeing live pitching. I'm ready to go. I don't, hitters are not the people who need 6-week spring trainings." What's your level of concern about Sano, the timing of it, and what it could do to his season?
I'm concerned about it. Kadire's right. Hitters need about 2 weeks, unless if that's the only thing they have, the last 2 weeks of spring training, and they haven't quite found it yet, and you head into cold weather starts at the beginning of the season, and you haven't found your stroke in spring training, it can be a setback. So here's what happens in spring training. Most hitters, you get started, you start feeling pretty good. In the first couple of weeks, let's say, or 2.5 weeks, there's a week and a half to 2 weeks left to go, and you're just trying to hang on to that feeling that you have. And the worst thing is you never get it for 4 weeks. Second worst thing is getting it early and then losing it a little bit before the season starts. But with Sano, my concern is I feel like he needed to have two things. First of all, I'm concerned about his the injury-prone nature that we've seen, and I'm not big on this guy's injury-prone, and he will be his whole career. But on the other hand, it just every year it's something. It seems like, and there's no way to he has had no chance at all to develop any kind of consistency in his own approach and his own mental framework in the big leagues. And I feel for the guy. I mean, this one would be driving me crazy because I as you kind of allude to, it feels to me like this was going to be the year that Sano was going to do everything right as best he could and come in and try to have a big spring and take his place in the middle of the lineup in the middle of a really good lineup potentially. And here he is walking around in a boot again, and I feel terrible for him, and I'm concerned about what that does for him early in the season. Like Buxton, I think it's important for those guys to get off to good starts, and so if that doesn't work for Sano, that's not a good thing. Even though you only need 2 weeks, I think you need to be doing activities in spring training, not walking around in a boot for 2.5 weeks. So that's really disappointing.
All right, let's take a Twitter question from Pat Barrett. Will a solid closer and a starter with a solid closer and starter, would the Twins be ready to make a run over the next few years? He's of course mentioning Kimbrel and Keuchel. We've recommended Kimbrel, of course. I certainly don't think that they are going after a starter at this point. But let's take the question philosophically. Are they one really good starting pitcher and a closer away from being really highly competitive the next few years?
I would say that's pretty close to true. I think a closer emerging, either emerging through the free agent process like Kimbrel, or somebody stepping up like Romero or somebody actually emerging. I think they don't necessarily need the guy this year, but I don't think they can do it by committee for the next 4 years. And somebody needs to emerge by at least the second half of the season, in my view, for them to be a real bona fide contender. I think the lineup has the potential to be there, and so to support that lineup and the way they can catch the ball, I think a closer and to the second part of it, another starter. I think you got a better chance of a starter emerging, enough starting pitching positives to happen with the guys that they have. I'd love to have, a Max Scherzer on the team, but short of that, I think it's better to be judicious about, going after somebody like, Keuchel then and just see with Martin Perez and potentially Pineda and the big left-hander that pitched well yesterday. That they've been Mejia. That they've been. I've liked that young man for quite a while. He may end up doing something pretty good. So I think they're. It could shake out in a number of ways. But first and foremost, if they save 40 ball games this year with somebody, they're a contender. And if one other pitcher. If Barrios and Gibson have similar years and one other guy emerges as really, really solid, then that combination and they're absolutely contending. The only other thing that I will say is, as good as I think the lineup is, and as much as we've talked about, Buxton and Sano being the key, really. I mean, more than Cruz, more than Scope, more than Cron, however you pronounce his name, and more than Marwin Gonzalez, nice pickup, and with Sano potentially hurt, really great pickup, right? I mean, fantastic. That's one of the reasons why I'm sure they went out and did that. But it's Buxton's team. I still believe it's Buxton's team. You see him go 5 for 5 and drive in 10 runs in 2 games, and it really, as I've thought about that, I think the most important development that could come out of spring training might very well be that Byron Buxton comes out, starts the season smoking hot, finds a real level of confidence, and grabs this team as his own the way he can. If that were to happen, it'd be more significant even than signing Kimbrel or finding another starter. That's the deal for me. The more I have thought about it, the more I believe that and watch, Buxton do the things that he did for a couple of games. The more I think, man, if he can just find something that he's confident in and start the season hot, and ascend to the key star status that he has the ability to, that will be the most significant thing.
You and other people who really know hitting intimately have told me over the last few years that, Buxton has great bat speed. He, when he has the right mindset, he can be a really dangerous hitter, but he does have that little bit of drag, or hitch, however you want to phrase it, where the bat is not going, like Kirby Puckett right from behind the ear to the hitting zone. There's a little bit of a loop in there. Do you see that? Have you seen that this spring, or have you heard about it? Do you have an updated opinion on how that swing looks?
I don't yet. I haven't seen it. I believe that Byron Buxton. I mean, there's for the most part so far they're seeing AAA pitchers, right? I mean, they're not. And I believe Byron Buxton can tear up AAA for the rest of his days. I just don't think it's just on sheer talent. So, 2 games does not make everything is fine now situation, and he'll have to prove it to himself over and over for a year in the big leagues, because that's the way it works. It works that way for everybody. And yet you have some success. They figure out some holes. They start exploiting those holes. You have to figure out what you're going to do about that, and keep your mind in a good spot even when you're struggling a little bit, so that you don't prolong that. I mean, all those things Buxton hasn't quite been through yet in the big leagues, and I'm just hoping that this is the year that he gets 600 play appearances, and he hits from a position of mental strength, and that he starts figuring those things out. And I think it's going to be, when I read that he just did his thing, he's not using a hitting coach per se. He's figured out what he's always done, and that's what he's going with. In a lot of ways, that's good. In a lot of ways, that's not great news, because you're right. He does some things mechanically that prevent him from that are conducive to him having holes and issues with certain pitches and certain sequences of pitches. And maybe that will just abate as he gets older and more comfortable. And that's why I say I'm just hoping he can break from the gate with in hot fashion, so that his mind calms down, and because if his mind is calm, probably the natural talent, swing flaws or not, will take over and make him a terrific player. I'd like to see him do some things differently with his swing, but that might not be possible for him. And so, then the adjustment you make is, okay, I can't hit this pitch, so I'm just going to take it until I get 2 strikes. I'm not swinging at that. And then my tendency is to try and is to swing at breaking balls in the dirt, for example. The way for me to not do that without changing my swing and talking to a hitting coach and doing all these other things, here's how I'm going to address that. If he can do those kinds of things, then I think it'll be a good, a potentially breakout year for him. But as I've said before, it's been Buxton and Sano, and it's been their team that they're building around. And I believe that Buxton is the more important of the two now. And if they get both of them, they're going to be fantastic. If they get one of them and it's Buxton, then that whole team changes, in my opinion.
Really interesting perspective on that. Let's get a final thought from Roy on anything he wants: MLB, Twins, other sports, music, movies, whatever he likes. Thanks again to Brandon Morton, our producer, and our sponsors, Berry Coffee, berrycoffee.com, and Tony Hoaglund, your State Farm agent in Champlin, Hoaglund. Final thought, Roy, whatever you want.
Well, here's what I've been thinking. When we were talking about, it's spring training, as much as I'd love to talk about music and stuff, we're getting close now, and we see a Twins lineup that everybody's talking about now as maybe having a chance. And the one thing that is going to be the case this year, and I don't know that this is necessarily going to be a problem, but but it's going to be a fact, and that is that this team's going to strike out a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And, you've got, if you just go through the lineup with what they've all done so far, Polanco in his career has a rate of over 100 strikeouts a year. Rosario, 100 strikeouts a year. Buxton, well over 100 strikeouts a year rate. Sano, well over 200, approaching 250 strikeouts a year. Cron will strike out. Scope, 150 strikeouts a year. And on and on. Nelson Cruz strikes out a fair amount, although you can live with Nelson Cruz's strikeouts because of the home runs and the walks that he gets. So, when you say that Nelson Cruz is probably one of the better on-base percentage guys per non-strikeout, given the number of times he strikes out, that starts telling you, Kepler is a 100 strikeout. Just you go right around the field, and if anybody doesn't strike out 100 times, they're going to have consider that. We'll have to consider that a fantastic contact year this year for these guys. So I just want to, that is a facet of this team. They're going to hit the ball out of the ballpark. They're going to strike out. And it's another one of the reasons why I just think Buxton is so important, because he's going to be the guy that is going to be running around the bases, more than anybody else, and creating, that kind of excitement. He and Rosario, and to some degree Polanco, but it's not gonna be without trips, right turns back to the bench from home plate for the entire lineup.
I hadn't really thought much about it, and I'm heading down to spring training. I'm going to have to talk to some people about that. That actually sounds like a good column because I think they're going to hit a lot of home runs, but they're going to strike out a lot, and it's going to be a very different way to watch Twins baseball.
It's going to be